Prologue: The Fire in the Sky. It began on a Wednesday. That was the strange part, how ordinary it was. At 3:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the skies above the western Pacific Ocean lit up with a streak of fire. Satellites picked it up first. A faint but undeniable object entering Earth's atmosphere. At first, it was believed to be a meteorite, nothing uncommon. But it didn't burn up completely. Something made it through. It landed in the remote reaches of Papua New Guinea. No one saw it. No camera caught it. But from the moment it made contact with Earth's soil, everything began to change. They called it the bloom. Chapter 1: The First Spores. The first incident occurred in a small village near the Sepik River. Entire herds of livestock collapsed overnight. Crops blackened and wilted within hours. Locals reported glowing patches of strange, iridescent fungus growing across the forest floor. Pulsated faintly, like a living thing. Then came the fevers. A missionary station nearby was the first to report what followed. High fevers, delirium, and a strange, bluish tint that began to spread under the skin of the infected, like veins of liquid light. The bodies of the dead rapidly decomposed, almost dissolving into a fine powder. The fungal growths grew thick around the corpses, then vanished as if absorbed into the earth. Within weeks, the entire region was quarantined. But it was already too late. Chapter 2: Spread. By the time global health organizations were fully aware, the spores had already spread. Not just by wind or contact, but through the atmosphere itself. Something about the bacteria's structure allowed it to survive high-altitude winds, hitching rides on weather patterns and global currents. Scientists soon discovered it was not a bacterium in any traditional sense. Under electron microscopes, its cells were geometrically perfect, crystalline lattices unlike anything on Earth. It adapted rapidly, almost intelligently. Its genome was not only alien, it was modular. It could incorporate DNA from its environment and rewrite itself in real time. It spread faster than any disease in recorded history. The effects varied by region and climate, but one constant remained. Anything organic was vulnerable. Entire rainforests collapsed under sheets of bioluminescent decay. Cities saw mass outbreaks. The infected experienced visions before death, hallucinations, dreamlike sequences of vast alien worlds and towering crystalline forests. Some called it divine, others a curse. Global panic set in. Chapter 3: The Fall of Nations. Attempts to contain the bloom failed miserably. Standard antibiotics and antifungals had no effect. Military-grade flamethrowers worked temporarily, but the spores simply returned, often stronger. They learned. They changed. By the second year, over half the human population was either dead or missing. Governments collapsed. Satellites went silent. Air travel ceased. The internet fractured into isolated nodes of dying information. The final broadcast from the World Health Organization described the bloom as a non-terrestrial biological entity exhibiting self-replicating, adaptive, and semi-conscious behavior. A living disease, not just spreading, evolving. The skies began to change color in certain regions. Auroras bloomed unnaturally over the equator. A permanent twilight hung over parts of North America. Glowing towers of fungal growth rose from the ruins of major cities, pulsing slowly, like breathing organisms. They were no longer just spreading, they were building something. Chapter 4: Survivors. In the Rocky Mountains, a group of survivors formed a hidden enclave. Among them was Dr. Lina Varga, a former xenobiologist with NASA. She had been studying extremophile organisms for Mars missions before the world fell apart. Now, she led a small team trying to understand what the bloom wanted. "I don't think it's trying to kill us," she once said to a young man named Eli, one of the few survivors immune to the hallucinations. "I think it's trying to teach us." Lina believed the visions seen by the infected were not symptoms, but messages. Memories encoded in the bacteria. Genetic memories. A language written in biology. Others weren't convinced. They burned any bloom growth on sight. But Eli had begun to hear things. Not just in dreams, but in waking life. Whispers in a language he didn't know. Shapes in the clouds. Patterns in the wind. The bloom was reaching out. Chapter 5, Contact. 3 years after the first incident, an expedition led by Lina and Eli ventured into a forbidden zone. What had once been Chicago, now a vast jungle of glowing mycelium and mutated plant life. In the center stood a spire nearly a kilometer high, shaped like a crystal tree. There, they found a chamber of pulsating membranes, like a heart turned inside out. And in its center, a sphere, floating, humming. Eli approached it. The others tried to stop him, but he moved like he was in a trance. When he touched it, the entire spire lit up. The visions intensified, and then everything went silent. When Eli awoke, his eyes glowed faintly with the same bioluminescence as the spores. He spoke a new language, one no one else could understand. Lina recorded everything. Chapter 6, Revelation. Eli no longer aged. His body changed, not visibly but on a cellular level. The bloom had made him its messenger. Through him, Lina and her team learned the truth. The spores had come from a world long dead, a planet consumed by its own sun. Before its destruction, a civilization had encoded its entire history, knowledge, and consciousness into a living microbial network. A library of life, scattered across the stars. Earth was not invaded. It was chosen. The bloom was not a weapon. It was a seed, a second chance, a new genesis. But for it to grow, the old world had to end. Epilogue, The New Earth. It is now year 7. Humanity as it was no longer exists. Cities are ruins overtaken by impossible ecosystems. Animals have changed. Plants no longer follow earthly logic. The sky shimmers with unknown hues. Small enclaves of new humans, post-bloom hybrids, walk the land. Some, like Eli, can communicate directly with the network. Others simply live in harmony with it. The Earth has become a symbiote, no longer just a planet, but a host to an ancient, alien memory seeking to begin again. The stars are watching. The bloom still grows. And beneath the soil, the dreams of a dead world begin to awaken. Chapter 7, Between Worlds. The months after Eli's transformation were surreal. Lina kept detailed notes. She had a makeshift lab built beneath a moss-covered mountain outcrop they now called the Ridge. It was one of the few areas not completely overtaken by the bloom, though tendrils of soft light crawled through the rocks, always watching, always listening. The ridge had a river, access to clean geothermal springs, and thick fungal growths that glowed gently at night like fireflies woven into the earth. Food was no longer scarce. The team learned to cultivate the mutated plant life, much of which was highly nutritious and oddly cooperative, responding to music, even thought. There were mushrooms that sang in ultrasonic frequencies when ripe. Fruits that grew back faster when treated with kindness. Eli was changing still. His skin sometimes shimmered in moonlight. He no longer needed to sleep, though he often sat motionless for hours, as if dreaming while awake. When Lina asked him what he saw, he described cities orbiting dying suns. Great machines turning oceans into stardust. A people made of light who had long forgotten fear. They weren't gods. Eli said one night, his voice distant. They were desperate, just like us. Chapter 8: Echoes of the Past. Lina's team had dwindled to 15. Some died from exposure to high concentrations of spores. Others changed, mentally fractured by the visions. One, a botanist named Remy, disappeared for 3 weeks. When he returned, he had built a garden deep in the forest. A precise, geometric pattern of plants and fungi that seemed to pulse in unison. He claimed he didn't remember building it, said it grew through him. They began calling these structures echo sites, alien installations formed by Earth life under the influence of the bloom. They were all over the world now, visible from orbit. Spirals of glowing mycelium, hexagonal crystal fields, root structures that hummed with low vibrations. The Earth was reorganizing. Nature had become an architect. Lina, always the skeptic, had become more open. She began to believe that the bloom wasn't just trying to restart evolution, but guide it. One morning, while hiking the northern edge of the ridge, she found a deer grazing among tall silver grasses. It raised its head, looked at her, and blinked 2 sets of eyes. Not hostile, not afraid, just curious. When she returned to the lab, she found her notes rewritten in someone else's hand. Diagrams filled in. Equations completed. Eli smiled faintly when she confronted him. You were close, he said. They're just helping. Chapter 9: The First Bloom Born. It happened in the 11th month. One of the team members, Maya, gave birth to a child. The pregnancy was not expected. It had been a quiet affair between her and Tom, the last engineer in the group. But the child, born with faintly luminous veins and a soft, rhythmic pulse under his skin, was the first of what they came to call the bloomborn. He didn't cry. Instead, the baby made a soft, cooing sound that resonated in the fungal canopy above the ridge, causing the entire forest to light up like a galaxy. Eli sat with the child for hours at a time, and the child never took his eyes off him. He understands, Eli whispered. He doesn't have to learn the way we did. He's already part of it. Others began to feel it too. They dreamed of each other's thoughts. They could navigate by instinct through unfamiliar terrain. Injuries healed faster. The bond between human and world had blurred. The bloom was no longer foreign. It was home. Still, not everything was peaceful. Some of the older survivors, those from the pre-bloom world, couldn't adapt. A few left the ridge to find others like them, hoping for untouched lands, human lands. None ever returned. Final notes. Lina wrote less and less in her journals. Not because there was nothing to say, but because words no longer seemed adequate. The bloom had changed language itself. Meaning now lived in shared dreams, in patterns of growth, in the way light curved through mist. Eli no longer looked entirely human, though his kindness remained. He told stories of what was to come. Forests that would grow cities, rivers that would carry song, skies that would reflect memory. The earth had not been conquered. It had awakened.